right, if you'll open your Bibles back up to the book of Colossians, we're going to continue our study there. Colossians chapter 3, verses 20 through chapter 4, verse 1. And last Sunday, we looked at relationships. It was a sort of a fun Sunday night. I enjoyed that. And I made a lot of good points with my wife then, I tell you what. But that was all about relationships between husband and wives and also about between parents and children. Now this week, we're also going to talk about relationships, and that's between employee, employer, perhaps if you're younger, students and teachers. But that's going to be the subject for this evening as we move through the practical part of the book of Colossians. So Colossians chapter 3. Now, you know, when you're working and in your occupations, in your jobs, there's two kind of extremes. Now, first of all, there's workaholics. Those are the ones who your job consumes you. I mean, every part of it. You eat that job, you sleep that job, you dream about that job, you live it. I mean, every part of that job eats you up. And I don't know if I'm talking to any workaholics in here. There may be some. There may be some that have been that before you retired and you had that as part of your life. You may know somebody that's just a workaholic. That's all they think about is their job. Well, first of all, I want to say that's wrong. Your work is not to be your God. But that's really not the subject for this evening. The subject for this evening is more toward the other end of the extreme, workophobics. Now, we got any of those in here? You're afraid of work, fear, or you hate your job. Now, I would ask you tonight, if you hate your job or if you hate what you're doing, if you hate your role as being a stay-at-home mom, or perhaps you hate being a student, but I'm afraid there might be somebody here who could tell on you if you raised your hand, get in all kind of trouble. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands about that. Maybe somebody you work with here that's watching you. See if you say you hate your job. But do you like what you do? That's really what this entire passage is about. Liking what you do as far as an occupation or as far as being a student. And the Bible teaches us that we should like what we spend the most time doing. So, not to the extreme where it's your God, but you should enjoy your work, whatever it might be, so that you can passionately do it for the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, a lot of times, especially this is the guys, we compartmentalize our lives, you know. I mean, there's a section of our life that's for our social life, and there's a section of our lives that's for our home life, and there's a section of our lives that's for our work, and there's a section of our lives that's for church, and we tend to sort of separate those like they don't ever run together. And that's not really the way that the Scriptures teach that we should look at our lives. The Bible says that we shouldn't separate our jobs from our life's purpose. Now, the resume that I submitted to this church when I was talking to the pastor search committee, I think that I had a section on my secular employment. That's when I was a CPA and I worked out in the business world. And then my pastoral experience. And as I think about that more, I don't think I should have done that. Because really, there's no part of any employment that I've ever had that should be considered secular. All of it should be considered working for the Lord, no matter where you are. So it's wrong to think about perhaps work that's outside the pastoral ministry or outside the church as being secular, because for a Christian, you're working for God wherever you are. Now, Christians are to work for God wherever they're employed, whatever they're doing. And I'm including students tonight too. You may hate school. It may be something that you cannot stand. Remember that you also, in your schoolwork, are working for that same Lord. So let's take a look at Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 through 25. And I know you're going to see terms here like slavery. You're going to see a slave and perhaps those that are working for the master. You're going to see the master mentioned here. Now, I know that's been outlawed. We don't do that anymore. But I want you to replace the terms here. Where it says slaves, think about employees. Where it says masters, think about employers. Where it says slaves, think about students. Where it says masters, think about perhaps the teachers. Where it says slaves, think about husbands. No, I'm just kidding. That's not, I better not go there. I'm getting in trouble. I'm going to undo everything I did last week. All right. But let's look at this passage. Verse 22. Slaves, in all things, obey those who are your masters on earth, not with external external service as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which has been done, and without partiality. Remember that ultimate question I gave you for my kids in school? When I know Jake's not in here right now, I can talk a little bit more freer. Of course, he might get the tape, so don't give him this tape. Now, he's actually a good kid. He's up on the second floor. He's on higher ground. He's in Awana tonight. He's been in the Awana program before, so he was very excited to get back in there. But, if he ever makes a bad grade, which he does occasionally, he's not a perfect A student in everything he does. One of the things what's that question I always ask him? You know what I'm asking? Did you do the best you could? Did you do your best? Did you try your hardest? Did you put everything you had into it? And if he can honestly tell me that he has, and convince me of that, then there's a whole lot less consequences, rather than he said, well, I didn't try all that hard this time. I didn't study all that hard. But I want you to ponder that question tonight, all of us. Whatever job the Lord has given you to do, whether it's out there in the world in employment, whether it's inside the church, whether you're a student in school, are you doing your best? Are you doing your best for the Lord? The passage here that we just read says in verse 22 that you should do your best in all things. All things. Even in the distasteful parts of your job. Even in the distasteful parts of whatever you're doing as service and volunteer in the church. Whatever it is, whatever job you're doing, whatever work you're doing, all things we are to obey and do our best and give it all to God. In verse 22 it says this phrase, with sincerity of heart, with all your heart, with passion from your heart. In verse 23, in my translation, it says to work heartily, to work with all your heart. The heart, when you think about that organ in your body, it may not be all that impressive because, it's just, well, I love somebody with all my heart. What does that mean? Well, the phrase, the terminology in the Scriptures, when you use your heart as loving somebody or doing the best you can with all your heart, it really encompasses your entire being, your soul, your mind, your strength, everything about you, your body. What it's saying here is give everything you got. When somebody says, I love you with all my heart, that means I love you with every part of my being. And I've worked as hard as I can with all my heart for the Lord. That means that every part of you have given him your service. So in all things, with all your heart, you're supposed to do your best at whatever you do. So tonight I ask again to reflect. It's time to ask ourselves, are we obeying this commandment? If you have a job, are you on time? You promptly show up when you're supposed to show up? Are you well prepared when perhaps maybe you're a teacher? You go in that classroom. Are you prepared for the class that you're about to instruct? Are you dependable? When people talk about you and about your character, can they rely on you to show up? Can they rely on you to do your best? Are you dependable? The way I like to look at it is, do you treat whatever you're doing like you would if it was a family-owned business? Like it was all at stake. Or, on the other hand, are you sometimes a no-show? Are you sometimes one who can't be depended on? Or are you sometimes a late arriver who everybody has to wait on to get the job done? Are you what's called a quota type guy? You know what those are? I'm going to do the least I can, whatever I can do to get by. I'm just going to do the least. I'm not. You know anybody like that? I hope there's nobody in this church tonight that's like that on anything you do, on any job you have, whether it's paid or volunteer. And one of the biggest abuses, I must say, is in the church. I mean, we know that. You see it. Today, people think, well, Brother David is paid staff and Brother Jim is paid staff. I'm a volunteer. They're just going to have to take whatever they can get out of me. That's a terrible attitude. That's not the kind of attitude for God. That's total disobedience to the passage here. What we should say is, whether I'm paid or volunteer, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to do my best for the Lord. I'm not working for man, I'm working for God. And let me give you 3 things that happen when you disobey the commands that I've been through here. First of all, if you're not working with all your heart at whatever you're doing, you are ruining your Christian witness. You ever thought about that before? Ruining that Christian witness. The Bible teaches us in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, to be ready to make a defense to all who ask you to give the reason for the hope that lies within you. So if anybody ever comes up to you and asks you, why are you different? Why are you working so hard? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why are you different than everyone else around? That gives you the open door to share the hope that you have in Jesus Christ. In this very same passage in Colossians, going over to chapter 4, verse 5, you can see it says, conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. If you're not working with all your heart at whatever you're doing, you're not making the most of the opportunity that God has given you to make an impression on those that are around you that are not believers. There are a lot of things you can do that hurt your witness. For missions, for instance. You know, there's some different things if you're going to go to Haiti that you have to do in order to be a good witness. You know, there are some there, if you light up a cigarette in Haiti, that's going to ruin your total Christian witness. Some of the ladies that we've been on the trips with, they might have some tattoos on their legs or on their arms or on their shoulders. They've got to cover those up with bandages or shirts or something, because if they see a tattoo on your body, that's going to ruin your Christian witness. It's just the culture of the thing. If you wear clothing, especially for the ladies that has any type of your middle showing or your legs or you're wearing pants, you can't wear pants in Haiti. You have to wear skirts, long skirts. It's the cultural thing. If you don't do it that way, if you don't respect the culture, then you're going to lose your Christian testimony. There was a young fella that I was going with one year, and he was about, I think, 20 years old, 19 years old. And right before the trip, he had some piercings done. And, I personally, whatever he wants to do with that, I don't care, but you can't do it in Haiti. Because if you have that in Haiti, you lose all your Christian witness. And that's the culture. Somebody sees you out at the bar, you're drinking a beer or some alcohol, they're not a Christian, what are they going to think? You're going to lose your Christian witness. They're not going to hold you up as respect like you would hope that they would if they see you going into an R-rated movie. Some non-Christian sees, oh, you're supposed to be Mr. Christian, you're supposed to be Mrs. Christian, and you go into that movie. You really damage your Christian witness. If you go to the convenience store down the street and start buying lottery tickets off the counter, I will tell you now, you're going to lose respect to those that are around you. It's going to hurt and damage your Christian witness. There's a whole lot of things that you can do to hurt your Christian witness, even in your job. You see, if old Joe sees you ain't pulling your weight at work, he's not going to listen to you about Jesus. He's just not going to. That's really what this is all about. And you say, well, old Joe acts the same way I do. Well, that's the problem. He doesn't see you any different than he is. You're supposed to be the Christian. He's not the Christian. He doesn't have that higher power that he recognizes that he has to respond to and obey. There was a guy when I worked with Alabama Power Company. He was sort of a guy who stood off by himself. He was very quiet, and he was a meter reader. And one of my jobs that I had there when I was very young was I was supervisor of the meter readers and collectors in a certain district. And one of the meter readers, the rules they had back then, they had, rather than all this mechanical gadgets to punch in the meter readings, they had to mark it down on cards. And then they put the cards, you tell how old I am now. I mean, this is really old. They take your markings and they plug it into the computer, and then you would have your bill come out. But the union had a rule that if it was raining, then the meter readers didn't have to read the meters. They'd sit around and play cards. And that bothered me to death, because I was a supervisor. I had routes to get done, and if they got mad at me, and if it came just to drizzle, they'd lay out on me. There was one meter reader that didn't join the bunch. He was different. His name was John. And it was drizzling one day, and old John just went about his business. And it started raining even harder. He just kept on going. He came back in. He had finished his route. You should have seen the abuse he took from all those that he worked with. And I went to him and I said, John, I said, you really put your neck out on the line today. I said, you did something that these other guys are going to hold over your head for a long time. You know what he said? He said, I don't work for the union, and I don't work for them, and really I don't work for you, David. I work for my Lord Jesus Christ, and I'm going to do the best I can wherever I am. And I really respected that man for that. He was a good Christian witness, and he made an impression on me because at that time in my life I wasn't like a Christian should. He taught me a lesson. So if you are not working as hard as you can wherever you are ruining your Christian witness. The second thing you're doing, you're taking the Lord's name in vain. You say, well, I didn't cuss at God. I didn't use his name in a cuss word. Well, that's really not what the third commandment's all about. In its deepest meaning, what it means is that not just taking his name in vain in curse words, but in your life. It's sort of like if you have this sticker on your car and you say, I love Jesus, or honk if you love Jesus. And then you go around honking and cursing everybody as you go by them. You know, that's taking the Lord's name in vain. But you're also taking the Lord's name in vain if you don't work as hard as you can in whatever God asks you to do, whatever he assigns you to do. Some people think, well, God's not all that concerned about his name. You've got to read the Old Testament. I mean, all throughout the Old Testament, God is doing everything he does for his name's sake. I mean, he chose Israel, and he delivered Israel not just because he loved people and loved his children, but he did it primarily because of his name's sake. He didn't want to have his name profaned among the nations around Israel. In Isaiah 48:9, he says, I delayed my wrath for the sake of my name. In Ezekiel, 3 times in chapter 20, he said, I acted for the sake of my name. It's always for the sake of the Lord's name. He says, so that it would not be profaned among the nations around Israel. He says, if you swear falsely, I'm going to punish you. Why? For the sake of my name. If you speak presumptuously in my name and say, I said it and I didn't say it, I'm going to punish you for the sake of my name. God cares immensely about his name. That's what it's all about. That's really what our purpose is all about, is lifting up the name of the Lord, the reputation of God. So when you are not working as hard as you can in whatever God has assigned you to do, you are taking the Lord's name in vain. Hard-working Christians are ambassadors for Christ. I mean, you are an ambassador for Christ. In the early church, if you read the documents about the time when the early church was formed and was just beginning to operate and to meet together, there are some documents from non-Christians, from secular sources, that say, you know, these Christians, they're different. They work harder than anybody else, and they stay out of trouble. They are our best citizens. And actually, Roman documents have been found that make those claims and make those compliments toward the early church and the members of it. I've always loved it when employers would call the church, you got any Christians there that might need a job? Isn't that great that somebody would call and ask, are you have any Christians there that have this skill that might need a job? And I love that because they know that somebody who is a believer in Christ is going to give it their all. That's what I hope is going to happen. One thing happened to me. I'll tell you, the biggest compliment I've really received in my accounting career was when I was about to leave the firm of Ernst & Young. I'd been in that CPA firm for a long time. I was a manager in that firm, and I'd taken another job. And toward the end of my stay there, one of the young fellows that worked for me, he was talking to the partner that was my boss. And he said, yeah, I hadn't seen David today, but I guess he's sort of got that short-timer disease. And I never will. He told me what my partner said. He said, the partner says, that's not the David Reed I knew. That's one of the greatest. That guy didn't dish out compliments very often. But it was something that I really will remember to this day because it meant so much to me. 1 Timothy 6, chapter 6, verse 1 says, honor your masters so that the name of God and our doctrine will not be spoken against. It's all about the name of God. It's not about us. It's not about anything that we can do. It's about lifting up God's name in everything we do. So if you disobey this passage, you're ruining the Christian witness, you're taking the Lord's name in vain, and you're rebelling against God himself. You ever thought about that? You're rebelling against God. A few years back, there was a bumper sticker that was very popular. Question authority. It was on the college campus. Everywhere you go, question authority. You know, that's unbiblical. That's an unbiblical statement. There was a guy that I went to church with in Tennessee. He was in our Sunday school class. And one day we were talking about taxes and how high the taxes were. He said, well, I don't pay any taxes. And I said, you don't? We're all surprised about it. He said, no, because the government uses that money to fund Planned Parenthood, and because of that, I'm not going to pay any taxes. I hadn't paid any ever. And I said, well, have you ever read Romans 13? It says, pay your taxes. There was a guy that I was in the Sunday school class with, and his wife came in one day, and she was bragging about her husband getting this brand new job. And she said, you know the best part about this job? It's paid in cash money. Now, she was alluding to she wasn't going to pay any taxes on it. You know, we are rebelling against authorities that God has set up when we question authority, when we do things like that, when we have that kind of attitude. If you're in a job you hate, you know, it may be okay to change jobs. That's up to you and the Lord. Sometimes it is a good thing. But if the pattern in your life is a conflict with authority all the time, whether it's at your home or your school or at your job or at the church, let me tell you, it might be wise to look at the deeper issue that's going on in your life and ask God to help you to develop a biblical view of authority in your life. That's really what it's all about. Is respecting the authority that God has set up around you. God has delegated his authority to preserve order in this fallen world. I mean, just think about it. If we didn't have a government, if we didn't have any authority at all, it'd just be total chaos and anarchy. But nothing comes easier to fallen people than disrespect for authority. Now, you might say, Paul's got some good stuff here. He didn't know my boss. Maybe somebody out there like that, you know. He didn't know my boss. I mean, that doesn't cover what I'm having to put up with. There may be somebody here tonight. Maybe this is especially for you. But there's also a warning for bosses here. If you're a supervisor, if you're a manager, look at chapter 1, verse 1. Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. If you're a manager, if you're a supervisor, if you have someone under your authority, then you have even a greater responsibility than the one who is under their authority. You know who Truett Cathy is? He's the founder of Chick-fil-A. And that's a very successful business. I like their food. Formed in 1946. And you know the special thing about that restaurant that everybody seems to talk about? What is it? Closed on Sundays. Closed on Sundays, why? To give employees time to be with their families and to attend church. Isn't that great? He realizes who is number one in his life. He realizes who he reports to. I mean, that guy's got money, I'm sure. Man, I know he's rich. I know he's very successful. But he has a slogan with that company to put people and principles before profit. And God honors that. So if you are in a supervisory position or a stronger position and you have somebody weaker reporting to you, you better be careful here because God has serious warnings and commands for those in those positions that he's granted to you. There are strict commands in the Bible for those who have stronger positions like the husband or perhaps the parents and also the employers, the supervisors. There's not only a warning to bosses, there's something else to it. You may say, well, Paul didn't know my boss. Paul didn't know my boss. Paul knew your boss very well. You know where I'm coming from? He knew your boss very well. His ultimate master was God, and that's your boss. That's who you report to. Your God is an all-seeing God. You can't get away with anything. He sees it all. When you cut the corners, when you take it easy, a real true boss, the one on the job may not see it. The one that's working with you in the church, that's the chairman of your committee, may not see it. But that true God, he sees all things. He knows when you're doing those things. And you've got a sovereign God. Look at verse 24. That word Lord means something there. Lord means He's in charge. Is God in charge of that component of your life? Wherever you're serving, whether it be out in the world or inside the church, is He really Lord? Have you surrendered that over to Him? And verse 24 has something else. It says Christ. Christ is Messiah. It's the one who cares for you. It's the one who died on the cross. He's a caring God. He's an all-seeing God, a sovereign God, and a caring God. Your boss is wonderful. My boss is wonderful. I wouldn't want to work for anybody else. He's a great boss. The truth is, for some reason, I don't know what it is, God has put you in the position that He has. Whether it's in the job force, whether it's in the church, whether it's in the family, whatever it is, God has allowed you to be in the situation that you're in to be faithful. Be faithful to your boss. Be faithful to that boss, that master. Wherever you are right now, do the best that you can do. And just trust Him for the future. And the promise is, what I read here in verse 24, He will reap rewards on you by being obedient.